As someone who makes a lot of videos covering hardware and home lab stuff, you would probably think that I have a decent home lab setup. But the truth is, I don't really. It's pretty messy. But over the course of the next 2 days or so, I'm going to turn this into this. Well, I'm recording this beforehand, so hopefully it looks good. I don't know. Let's get started. Cleaning all of this up is going to be a bit tricky, but what isn't tricky is building a website with the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Squarespace makes website building easy, which is why I use it for my own website and online store. Their unique Fluid engine simplifies the process of creating attractive websites, even for someone like me who is terrible at web design. Additionally, Squarespace made it incredibly convenient for me to set up an online store where I can list my physical and digital products, and accept payments through credit cards, PayPal, and more. If you want to start building the website or online store of your dreams, visit squarespace.com/hardwarehaven and use code hardwarehaven to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Okay, so what all am I doing and why am I doing it? Well, the why is probably pretty obvious, at least in some cases. My networking is a mess. I have Cat5e ran throughout my house, and those wires all just come in through a hole in the wall into the multitude of random 8 and 4 port switches. I originally started off with a single 8-port switch and then needed PoE, so I added a 4-port PoE switch and then needed more ports, so I just have 3 of these sort of chained together. So I want to clean up all of the networking stuff by A, getting a single gigabit switch, and then also cleaning up all of the wiring. Now to do that, I'm going to be using this. This is a, I don't know the model number off the top of my head, a T1600G28PS. Or more importantly, it's a 24-port PoE gigabit switch from TP-Link. And it's a bit gross, as you can tell. This actually came from my previous job. We used a lot of these for AV networking because they're pretty cheap and fairly reliable. But this one potentially started to have some issues. It was unclear if it actually was the switch or not, but we were already upgrading to some newer switches anyway and decided to just play it safe and retire this one. So it's pretty dusty, a bit gross, but I'm gonna try cleaning it up, doing a factory reset, just giving some new life to it and letting it replace those 3 gigabit switches that are in my network closet. And you might be asking, well, this is a rack mount switch, where's it gonna go? And that's where this comes in. See, I'm not one of those cool YouTube home labbers that has a whole rack with a whole bunch of servers and drives and all that cool stuff, but I happen to have this rack here and some other random pieces from when I did more audio stuff, and I figure I could turn this into a small little network rack. It's a bit unideal since it's meant to be sitting on a desk, so it actually angles backwards a bit, but it should fit on that shelf in my network closet, and I may be able to put some legs on the back to sort of straighten it out a bit. Now to clean up all of that mess of Cat5e cables coming in the wall, I got this. Cable Matters 24-port Cat6 Keystone patch panel, and so this will let me punch in all of those cables and have them nicely labeled and in this little rack so that I can run patch cables to my switch or wherever those connections need to go. Hopefully cleaning it up quite a bit and getting rid of the big mess of cables. I also picked up this little cable grommet, so for any cables that aren't going to be punched into the patch panel, they can just cleanly run through here. I also have at least one 10 gigabit switch here, but that's going to be used in a follow-up video. So make sure and get subscribed or whatever. The other 2 things you probably saw are my Mac Mini and my 2-bay Synology NAS. My Synology NAS handles my security cameras and some simple storage for family stuff, and my Mac Mini is what runs all of my services currently. I'm probably going to be upgrading that 2-bay Synology in the second video, so stay tuned. But for today, I do want to replace that Mac Mini because while the 2012 Mac Mini has been great for me, It's my original home server I first set up, and it honestly works great. It handles all of our services we use at home, like Plex and Home Assistant, but I'd like to move everything to something where I have a bit more flexibility, because I'd like to be able to spin up virtual machines or containers and test things out whenever I need to, and the Mac Mini wasn't quite cutting it. So that's where this comes in, and you might recognize this. This is the Geekom Mini IT12. I covered this in a video a while back where I talked about using the P and E cores on the Alder Lake CPU in here for virtualization and how you could potentially manipulate those to get better performance. But I'm going to be turning this into my main home server. I'm going to set up Proxmox so that I can spin up virtual machines and containers to make it a lot easier for me to test things out, which I haven't really been able to do a lot of recently. Now, alongside this, I'm actually going to be running this TinyPilot KVM. I don't know why I'm holding it like that. This TinyPilot KVM. And this was actually sent over to me a while back, and I had some ideas for how I was going to use it, and it just didn't work out. So it's just been sitting in my garage for a while, and so I'm finally going to put this thing to use. So I'm going to have this hooked up with the Mini IT12 sitting in the rack. That way, if there's ever any issues with this server, I have a KVM that I can remote into and have complete access to this machine. So that'll be pretty sick. The plan right now is that those will both be just sitting on this shelf alongside my Proxmox pfSense box. It's a Seed Odyssey running Proxmox with pfSense and then running containers for all of my networking stuff like WireGuard and Pi-hole. Those will all be along this bottom shelf, then with the switches, grommet, patch panel, and everything above it. And in that follow-up video, I'm probably going to be adding in a 10 gig switch here. So yeah, stay tuned. I made sure to do backups of my whole router firewall setup earlier today, and I think now I'm going to get started with labeling everything, because a lot of the cables, I don't necessarily know where they go, and I'm going to need to make sure I know what cable it is before I punch it into the patch panel. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So for all things labeling, I'm going to be using this, which is quite honestly the best purchase I've made since running this channel. This is the Brady M210, and this labeler is awesome. One of my favorite things about it is that it can use nylon labels, which wrap around cables and don't peel off like cheaper vinyl labels do. So this thing's great. I'm about to get started hunting down all of the cable runs in my house. Fortunately, when I first got the house, I traced them down and just did some like dots or lines on the cables to identify which cables went to which room. So for most of them, it should be pretty easy. I added in a few more lines after we built the house, and those I don't think are labeled, but yeah, the rest should be, so hopefully it won't be too difficult. So I don't necessarily trust all of my labeling as I'm looking at these. So to go double check all of the Cat5 jacks around the house, I'm going to use a trusty old Zima board with a PoE adapter. That way I can just plug it into a PoE switch, and if it kicks on, I can see it light up, and I can tell which jack is which. I'm realizing now that a lot of the tools I used to use at my job, I forgot that I don't own those. They belonged to my work, so I don't have my awesome little Cat5e testers to go hunt down lines. It's kind of a bummer, but yeah, let's go do it this way. I got all of the Cat5e lines labeled and also labeled the ports on my pfSense box. It was about lunchtime at this point, and rather than risking my wife coming home to no internet, I decided to skip working on the patch panel and move over to the TP-Link switch. It was pretty dusty, so I took it apart and then gave it the Hardware Haven treatment on my back porch. I also did my best to clean out the ports, and tried using a hairdryer to remove this label, as I've been told to do that in some comments. However, that just turned the label into sort of a goo. So I just stuck with some good old isopropyl alcohol and elbow grease. While I already had my tools out, I opened up the Mini IT12 to add some storage. I don't need much for this machine, so I added in a 1TB 2.5-inch SSD. I also removed the Wi-Fi card and dropped in this Coral TPU, because I might try to set up a virtual machine running Frigate for some AI recognition at some point. I also dropped in a 256GB NVMe SSD as a boot drive. This system originally came with two 8GB sticks of DDR4, but I decided for running some virtual machines, I'd want to have a bit more, so I went with two 16GB sticks for a total of 32. I plugged in the TP-Link switch to get it configured, and boy were the fans loud. Nothing a Noctua to a fan swap can't solve though. After a quick factory reset, I plugged the switch directly into my desktop, made sure I was in the same subnet, and then logged into the dashboard at 192.168.0.1. And from there, I was able to configure the switch as needed. I also installed Proxmox as I normally would on the Mini IT12, that way it would be ready to go whenever I dropped it into the rack. It was getting pretty late, so I decided to just call it a day. Alright, so it's day 2, it's 7 in the morning, and I think I'm going to go ahead and start trying to get all of these punched into the patch panel. So I'm going to turn all of this stuff off, and I think I'm going to try to move the firewall and just this one switch over off to the side so I can try to at least keep our internet and access points up so I have Wi-Fi throughout the day. And then I'm going to start terminating all of these to our patch panel and then try to get the rack in here. So I got all the big stuff out over here. I went ahead and turned my router back on here. Oh, I need to plug in one more patch cable. Okay, so I at least have that in my two access points hooked up. So I have Wi-Fi. I think I'm actually gonna hook that Mac Mini back up really quick as well, just so I have Home Assistant running. And then yeah, I think I'm gonna go put the rack together after that and put it in here and start getting all of these punched into the patch panels. So I've kind of turned my kitchen into a staging area of sorts, but we have everything we need here to go ahead and start putting the rack together. I put the patch panel up top, that way it'll kind of straighten out the rails, but as soon as we get everything else in, I'm gonna take the patch panel off so I can label it and then start punching all those wires in. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and label these. I have this already planned out where I want all of these lines to come into, so I'm gonna use my awesome labeler to go ahead and print off some labels for this, so yeah. So it's slowly coming together. I actually took the door off because it was getting annoying trying to film and get in there. But I have the little patch panel guys here. I have my notes for which ones I need to punch them all into. Before I do that though, I'm actually going to cut another hole in that shelf because I don't think I'm gonna have enough space to pass through all of the power cords that I need to pass through. So I'm gonna go ahead and drill this out while I have room and before I make a bigger mess. So I've got my first little panel guy here, and 11 and 12 is camera 1 and 2. So I'm gonna go ahead and wire those up. Actually, I'm gonna start with my two access points, that way I can test it. So this will be 5 and 6. Oh, I miss not having my nice wire strippers. Okay, I think that's correct. I'm gonna plug in the cable and double check. All right, you can't see it, but over here on my switch, I have PoE and a link, so we should be good. I'm gonna do these all via time lapse. Here we go. All right, so sorry for the fan noise. It's kind of getting a little toasty in this corner with all the lights. So I have all of them terminated, and I've tested at least the important ones, and they all work so far. So I don't have a fancy tester to test 10 gigabit or anything, but I'm at least getting gigabit and everything's working. So right now I currently have this hooked up to my router, so I still have network and stuff currently. But I think now I'm going to just call it quits, cut the network, pull everything out that doesn't need to be up here. And I think I'm just gonna go ahead and drop in. You can't really see my hand. Sorry, it's a really tight angle here. I think I'm gonna go ahead and try to get all this stuff just completely turned off, lose my network for a bit, get the rack in, and try to get it all hooked up. So here we go. Okay, so I've got it in. I went ahead and plugged the power in for the TP-Link switch just to make sure it would fit, and it's pretty close. I want to make sure this is angled up, even though it's not supposed to be. So I actually found these little L brackets out in my garage, and I think I can just tilt this up where I want it, at least for a temporary solution here. It's not the best solution. But yeah, I think for now I'm just gonna put those little brackets there to kind of tilt it up. And I don't think it's going anywhere. There's plenty of weight towards the back end, so I think we're good. So I think now I'm gonna go ahead and start getting everything else in. All right, so to start patching stuff up, I'm gonna use some of these 1 foot Cat6A patch cables I got from Monoprice, as well as some of these 6-inch guys, these little white ones, to do all of the little short runs. And then I have some longer patch cables that I've made that I'll do for some of the stuff to run through the grommet and everything else. All right, I'm gonna try to talk over this stupid TP-Link switch that's super loud. I'm definitely gonna replace those fans, and I was a little bit nervous about replacing the fans and it not getting enough airflow, but I figured out PoE just does not work on this switch. I'm not sure exactly why. It's kind of a bummer, but for the time being, I just put in my little 8-port switch that has these 4 PoE ports, which is all I need for 2 cameras and then 2 access points. So I just kind of jankily put that in up on the top shelf, but it actually works decently well. It's in a good spot. So we have PoE, cameras are working, access points are working, all of our networking's working. I will get to 10 gig stuff later on, but yeah, I actually just pulled up Proxmox here on the Geekom. I haven't set up TinyPilot yet. I'll probably do that here in a bit, but yeah, it's all there, but I've made a massive mess. So I'm going to probably start cleaning that up and then break for lunch. After lunch, I set up the TinyPilot KVM, and setup is a bit of an exaggeration because literally all I had to do was go to the URL and I had a KVM for my Proxmox server. If you need a simple KVM, the TinyPilot is pretty awesome, and if you're interested in one, I'll make sure to have a link to their website down in the description. All right, so I had the switch opened up and the fans were fairly easy to get out. There's just 2 screws for each right down here. And they have these little headers that were glued on. According to some guides, these little guides are actually backwards. Let me see if I can get this one off here. I'm gonna flip this around so we can drop in the Noctuas. Oh gosh, which should actually be here any second now. Okay, that looks good. I'm gonna do the other one off camera and then I'll get those Noctua fans in. And really quick, just to confirm that I have it right, I have my ground lead and my multimeter shoved into this ground thing there, whatever that's called. And I can see that the ground pin for the fans is this far one on the left, or on the right, I should say. And that lines up now with the pin on the Noctua fan, so these should slot in like that. All right, I got them installed, no issues. So let's, moment of truth here, see if it works. Oh, wow. That is like 1/10 the volume. Still a decent amount of airflow. So I did a little bit of digging around here while I had this switch open, and this little riser board up here seems to be the power delivery for all of the PoE, and that gets power input from this power supply over here, which should be supplying 53.5 volts out of this, and then this runs through some filtering stuff, I imagine, and then into this daughter board. And if I get my multimeter out, which I'm not gonna try to do it one-handed right now, but I only get about 1 volt out of this power supply here. And it should be giving us a 53.5 for all the PoE stuff, and it's not. I could maybe try to take that board out and see if I could figure out what's going on there, but I don't really feel like trying to deal with that, at least not at the moment. So yeah, this switch just can't do PoE. So we will stick with my stopgap solution of just having an extra switch for the meantime. I'm gonna go ahead and close this up, but man, that is so much quieter. Thanks, Noctua. All right, so it's actually been quite a few days of me running this setup, and so far it has worked great. Obviously, I still don't have PoE on the TP-Link 24 port because, as I discussed earlier, the power supply for the PoE seems to just be dead. But everything else is working great. I haven't had any issues. I have moved a few things around, like for example, my LAN port from my pfSense box here actually goes to the QNAP switch first, and then from that it goes to the 24 port switch. So the QNAP switch is sort of my main switch for the time being. Oh, you might have also seen that I dropped in the Synology and the Mac Mini, and the Synology I'm going to be keeping for at least a little while, and the Mac Mini I'm going to keep for as long as I need to get everything sort of transferred from that over to either virtual machines or containers on my Proxmox server or on one of my NASs. I'm still kind of figuring that out. It's actually surprisingly easy to work in because it's open on the back. It's pretty easy to reach in and run cables as needed. I even have it's a little awkward down here because I've been doing a lot of working. I moved my main NAS, the hard drive Haven NAS, in here, and that's been great. With the door completely closed, the temperature in here gets a bit warm, although I haven't seen anything. Anytime I check the Synology dashboard or the dashboard for any of the switches, temperatures all say that they're good. I don't know what the actual temperature of good means, but they all seem to be fine. And my hard drives in this stay relatively cool. Granted, it's down at the bottom, but I've been keeping the door cracked for the time being, and then I have some plans for getting better airflow in here for a video later on. But yeah, that's my new home lab setup, and I'm pretty happy with it. This setup is a bit unorthodox, but honestly, I feel like it makes sense for my channel. If you think there's anything I could have done better, make sure to put it in a comment down below. Also, if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe, and maybe even consider checking out my Patreon or YouTube member space, as I've posted a few new videos there and also have some new tiers. As always, thank you so much for watching, stay curious, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.